Yeah, I mean, no, there's very little that's accidental in my films. No, I mean, I like movies to take us outside ourselves and to give us 90 minutes or whatever of a kind of thrill, excitement, fantasy that's still grounded in some reality, but definitely plays fast and loose with restraints. I mean, I've kind of been an iconoclast all my life, even when I was a kid. I just bucked authority and hated rules and things that were imposed on me. And I felt the same way when I get to tell a story. It's like, you know, I wanted to not follow rules. I wanted to break outside those rules, at least in part. You know, there's some rules of storytelling you have to follow, or all you get is confusion. And but for the most part, it's treating it with the secret sauce.
Well, I'm so curious. Like, you know, is that something that you kind of just, even when you, like you said, when you were a kid, where did that come from? The idea of, I'm just not going to do things because I'm supposed to, or the way that other people are. Like, do you have any idea, like, where that came from as a kid?
I don't know. I think that my parents were a bit on the puritanical side, and that gave me something to work against. And I once wrote a line in a script, and a character, and one of the gimmicks was that the character is he meets himself. He's like 50, and he meets himself when he's 20. And the 50-year-old and the 20-year-old, the 50-year-old knows who the 20-year-old is, but the 20-year-old doesn't know who the 50-year-old is. And the relationship they have in this fantasy movie. And at one point, the 50-year-old gets to go to the bathroom with his own father, who's deceased, and the father is bitching about the 20-year-old version of the 50-year-old. and finally the father says, he goes, you know what a tough father is? And the guy says, the 50-year-old says, what? He goes, it's rocket fuel. He's rocket fuel. And I thought, well, that's it. Sometimes you get a certain weight put on you, and you can either bend under it, break under it, or you can resist it. And I was a resistor, so I went my own way from a very early age. I almost got expelled from school, believe it or not, in this day and age. But back then, I grew a beard in high school, and I wouldn't shave it off, and it became like a big deal. Like, it went all the way up to the superintendent of schools. And, it was just one of those things where it was like I was in on that whole first Bob Dylan wave, and it was just like the times they are changing. I wanted to be part of that. And I think carrying that into the movie business, to the very nature of my career, where I started out as a studio executive and producer, but always wanted to be a director. And everybody told me, no, you'll never make it. They don't allow that. That never happens. Very rarely does a producer get to be a director. And I was discouraged by people for a long time. I just went, hell with it. I'm just going to do it. And it took a while to get the pump primed, but when I wrote and directed Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, that kind of was the first success I had with wearing the new hat.
Well, even thinking about, in terms of no, you can't do this, or people saying this is the type of thing you have to do, or the path you have to take. Even thinking back, because you went to Harvard, correct? And you studied, was it anthropology, right? It's so much like, especially nowadays, it feels like, you have to go to film school. That's part of the path like that. The anthropology part of it, even at that point, were you thinking, I want to be a filmmaker?
Oh, from the time I was 16, I made my first little 8mm movie. I knew what I wanted to do, and I have never wavered in that. I'm actually more excited about filmmaking now than I was even in the younger years, and it just was like anthropology just seemed to me, the proper study of mankind as man, and it just seemed to me that people go to film school. Harvard had no film school, so it wasn't an option, and I didn't want to go to film school, and in fact, I urge kids not to go to film school. I think film school is actually very damaging to people and their creativity, and it just relies too heavily on what other directors have done in the past, and like being a lawyer, when you start getting precedential thinking, it's kind of limiting, it's like, well, this is what was decided here, or this is what was used here, and it's years of exploration that you should be making on your own and not listening usually to some guy who was in the movie business for a short time and failed. And that's the guy who's teaching you how to do it.
Right.
Well, I saw Francis Coppola wasn't teaching him how.
Well, I was also just thinking, like, in terms of the movies, you've done a lot of different types of movies, but they're primarily in the action sort of thriller genre. Were you a kid who just kind of absorbed tons of action movies? Were you like a big action movie kid?
Yeah, I love those. Give me The Dirty Dozen or The Great Escape on a Saturday afternoon, and I was happy as a clam in the mud. I just loved, tough guys and hot girls and motorcycles and Steve McQueen jumping over barbed wire fences with a Triumph motorcycle. It's the kind of shit that you either eat up or it leaves you cold. And for me, the big pivot point was when I got to direct the first year of Miami Vice. Up until that time, my first film, one was a comedy and one was a sort of autobiopic of my time at Harvard during the anti-war movement, a small circle of friends, and neither one of those connected at the box office, and certainly the comedy didn't connect with anybody about anything. And that was when I learned I will never direct another comedy. But when I got to, in 1985, when Michael Mann asked me to direct as many episodes of Miami Vice as I could schedule, I went down to Miami, and for the first time, I had the elements that I had so admired with the Robert Aldriches and the Sam Peckinpahs, and I had the fast cars, I had the cool guys with the nice clothes and the guns and the drugs and the action sequences, the fights, the shootouts, and I kind of blossomed on that show and felt like, okay, now I'm in my element, and in directing television for the next next 7 years, I learned so much, and it was mostly, I did some character shows, like a David Chase show called Almost Grown, and I did a Brandon Falsey show called Year in the Life with Richard Kiley, who's a lovely man, and you know, I did Private Eye for Tony Yerkovich. I did a lot of different, you know, I did the Nasty Boys for Dick Wolf, and I was moving around in that kind of genre, and then I was producing movies still. All through that, I produced Witches of Eastwick and Ironweed and Running Man, and you know, many movies as I was being a TV director. But I got a hold of a book about Linda Lee's relationship with Bruce Lee, and I thought, here's the perfect thing, because this has a real acting need. You know, Bruce Lee is an incredible character, and it's made an incredible actor to play him, but it's also got all the action stuff and stuff that from shooting fight sequences and so on. I had learned how my style of doing it, and I thought, well, here's a story that will involve everything: heart, action, mythology, mysticism, and I wrote the script, and then lo and behold, Universal liked it, and then, you know, but the challenge was go find Bruce Lee, and that's when Bonnie Timmerman, a casting director, told me, hey, I met a kid 6 months ago. He works as a flower delivery guy, but he's got something, and he was too Asian for Last of the Mohicans, but he might be good for you. And I dug that guy up, and it was Jason Scott Lee. And, you know, we made the movie, and it was a critical hit and a financial hit, and it was a beautiful thing.
Well, I was just thinking about, while you were saying that, like, in terms of, if somebody doesn't do, like, the film school thing, then the question is, like, how does one kind of make their way in the business? And I was thinking, like, you know, the time that you were transitioning from producing to focusing on directing was also the time of, like, people like, I don't know, James Cameron or John Carpenter, these guys who, like, you all just kind of, like, learned the ropes by doing, basically. It was like just one thing after another, and developing things and learning skills so that you could then use, like, that was sort of like the experience that you guys all had. I don't know if that's the way it is now for, like, younger filmmakers, I guess, because they have more access, because cameras are cheaper and things like that. But for guys like you, when you were starting out trying to direct, it really was just finding a project, getting someone to let you direct it, and then learning kind of as you went. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, on-the-job training, you know, it was like, there's something about filmmaking where if you're thrown in the deep end of the pool, you really have to look inside. You do not have well, you know, in The Searchers, John Ford used a 35 millimeter lens, and he put it in the sand, and he dug a pit, and then Duke Wayne walked from left to right, and that's how he got this shot. You know, that's what I meant, like the precedential thinking of a lawyer.
Yeah.
Like, we can't propose this argument because this argument was defeated back in 1933. And, you know, so you don't want to be thinking about other directors and what they did. It'll screw you so far up. You either have to have internal, like Spielberg, for example, who has internalized all of that viewing he did, all of that running of movies that he does compulsively. He had the brain, that incredible brain that will assimilate it all and put it away, so that when he gets to a place where he's standing by a techno crane and he wants to do a certain shot, he's not thinking, what did William Wyler do or what did John Ford do? He's just doing. He's not making somebody else's movie with somebody else's technique, and that's one of the things that makes Steven an iconoclast and also such a genius filmmaker, because he truly thinks out of the box, but the box has been very well studied.
Right.
So, and you know, to me and Steven, I mean, I think he had 6 months in film school or a year. I don't even think he went to film school. I think think he had a year at Long Beach State was his only higher education.
I think that's right. Yeah.
But the thought is go do it, and in doing it, you may fail, but you will learn who you are and what you have to contribute, and you will find some things that you did that you have no idea how you pulled off. And there are other things that you didn't rise to the bar that you set for yourself, and those are just as instructive, maybe more instructive than the successes or the failures, and that's, all through this business.
Your Hurricane Heist comes out in, a week and a half, something now, like that.
Yeah. March 9th, yeah.
Where are you right now in terms of, the movie's basically done. Are you at peace with the fact that however it's received? Are you nervous? Are you anxious? How are you feeling 8-9 days for release? like a man where you got people trying to find a vein so they can execute you. It's these releases are very tough on the nervous system, and any director that tells you they're not is lying, including the Christopher Nolans and the Spielbergs and the luminaries. This is a very nerve-wracking time. All you can do, the only function you have left is to talk to the press and try to put the case for your film out there. And then the rest is so far beyond you. I will work with entertainment studios. I will urge them. I thought they didn't have enough commercials that were just action-packed. There was too much dialogue, too many things on jokes and stuff. I just went, that's not why people want to come to this. They want to come to this because it's a gonzo action film. And we don't have any gonzo action commercials. And the Byron Allen Company is incredibly innovative. They're new, and they're not all, they're not so calcified, like studios get, where, no, this is what we did, we tested it, and, Right.
So they, over the weekend, they cut some really cool action spots, pure explosive action. And so you're trying in little ways, in a funny way, you're like those crazy brush people in curling. You're kind of brushing the ice and hoping your movie will land in the circle.
And that never gets easier. That never really changes, does it? Every film is that same kind of curling process, basically.
Absolutely. You got that right. I'm just the same guy as I was in 1992 waiting for Dragon to come out. And because so much rides on it, it's no joke about what have you done for me lately, and you're only as good as your last film. That's severely true today. And, so you're going to be judged, and there are several scales of judgment. There's Rotten Tomatoes, tomatoes. There's the box office. And a guy like me who's never made the movies that really are those critical type people's favorites, my reviews, the cinema score, and the box office. And, that's where you have to hope that the ads and the nature of the story and so on are reaching people, and that they're going to come no matter what score you get on Rotten Tomatoes. They just want to see it.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's really interesting is going back and reading other interviews that you've done over the years. You've mentioned that in terms of you've never been a critical darling, that type of movies that you make. Is that, how annoying is that? Out of curiosity, you're not making movies for critics, but is there ever a part of you that thinks, I do put a lot of work into these things, and I think they're good, and I'm proud of them. You guys could be fairer in terms of how you judge these types of movies. Is that ever an annoyance for you?
Yeah, it's an annoyance. I've gotten to a place in life where I just don't read anything. Because once you read it, you can never forget it. Because some of these people are really nasty. And especially in my history, they have been vicious in several instances. And, you know, it's like what they don't ever seem to understand is how complicated it is to make an action film. How much more an action film director has to know than, let's say, the guy who directed The King's Speech, which is essentially a filmed play.
Right.
And, you know, to mount an action sequence like that truck sequence at the end, or any of the larger action set pieces in Hurricane Heist, the knowledge of interfacing visual effects with on-set, the knowledge of how to create a reality for an actor that will be there one day, like what I was trying with Dragonheart with Dennis Quaid, you know. That guy who was so great acted against tennis balls on a C-stand with me reading Sean Connery's part. And I would ring the set with huge speakers and you know, really when I talked into that microphone, it sounded like I was 20 feet tall. And that volume, that scale of voice, plus animatics and hugely detailed storyboards, I was able to create a reality for Dennis that he could move through a situation where this 18-foot high dragon was not there, but he could feel that it was going to be there and what it might be like to act against this big mythical creature. And the knowledge to be able to do that and then make the first CGI acting character, and then, you know, whether it's the battle sequences or this or that or the other things, it all takes a lot to know, to do a daylight. And, you know, but it's very easy for these people to write these movies off because they don't like them. They wish Hollywood wouldn't make them. And they go into, you know, apoplexy or delirium over, you know, a film, let's say Lady Bird, which I have nothing against. I'm just saying they have gone overboard to the fact that you look at the film and you go, it's a nice film about a troubled girl in Sacramento, and you don't know what they're talking about. I don't. And you know, I was very happy that they had that real enthusiastic response to Black Panther, because, you know, Ryan Coogler is a wonderful director, and he did an amazing job on that film, and he kept to a cultural truth at the same time. He made a hell of a spectacle action film. So I was very happy that was, you know, critically well received. But it's that thing where you go, well, I'm not alone in this department. It's not like I'm the only one that they drug for making these films. But, you know, in the long run, I've created many franchises that have reaped this town many billions, not millions, but billions of dollars. And, you know, that's my own review, which is that if you ask people about Fast and Furious or Triple X or, you know, any of these films, Dragonheart, you find people who really love them and for whom they're really culturally important. And that's the best review of all, is the public.
Well, I was also thinking, like, especially in terms of Fast and Furious, it's like, nowadays it seems like in terms of big studio movies, using Black Panther sort of as an example, that there's so many action movies that are connected to a big intellectual property, some type of brand. Thinking about Fast and Furious now, it's kind of amazing to think it being made in the first place? Because it was a different time in Hollywood where you could kind of take a chance on something that didn't have super huge stars or a property that people knew and turned out to be really successful. You've talked a little bit about sort of the origins of Fast and Furious, but one of the things I was really curious about was this idea of you didn't see that movie as a big studio blockbuster, that you kind of thought more as like a B movie. Is that sort of how you felt at the time? And I'm curious to kind of hear you sort of talk about the origin of that.
I love it. You know, you either love a story or you don't love a story, right? If you don't love the story, you shouldn't be directing the movie, you know. And as I created that script with various writers, including David Ayer, I fell in love with these characters. I wanted this multicultural family to be at the center of all the racing and chasing and all the fun bells and whistles, but I wanted it to have a core and not to just spin out in space and be a car movie. And I think that decision and that love is what has kept it going for the last 18 years, is people fell in love with that world through these characters, through Van and Jordana and Michelle and Paul, of course. And, you know, they got to a place where they really wanted to see these characters. And when the studio went away from my formula in number 2 and 3, they were in trouble. This franchise was wobbling. And it was only when Vin made the appearance in Tokyo Drift at the very end, and theaters across America had their roofs blown off, that they finally went back to what I've been telling them all along, which is you need the cast. You have to keep true to the original thing that I did. And, of course, they did that, and then my difficulties with the producer, you know, they went with Justin Lin, and then he began to take it from where I was to another different direction in terms of reality or lack of reality, and, you know, more, you know, the heist ideas and so on. But it really was about loving a group of characters and a world in which you set them, and finding a way to pass that love on to the viewer and make them positively radioactive with excitement about what they were seeing, and all the experiments that I had wanted to try, doing things on Miami Vice and in other of my films. Since then, I just did it because the studio, frankly, wasn't paying any attention. They didn't care. They could not have cared less about this film. It was a little car movie for spring break. And the truth of that is empirical. They didn't even ask to see it till the first research preview. And, you know, usually the studio wants to see the director's cut, and then they're in the editing room, they're giving you notes, and they're giving you notes on the notes, and addendums to the notes, and, you know, and you then start making a movie that really isn't yours. But in this case, no one said boo. And one day they went, well, we'd like to look at the movie in Sacramento and see what you've done. And we went to Sacramento, and the rest was the rest, because from that first screening on, I never touched a cut. I never changed the picture, because it was scoring higher than they'd ever seen anything.
In terms of like the more recent Fast and Furious, do you still kind of consult with whoever is directing the next installment? Are you kind of on, or No, I'm totally disconnected from it, except knowing in my own heart that it was my imagination and hard work that got this thing launched. And I take great satisfaction of looking at the various pieces that are ever written about it that
of all 8 of them. And I always feel good about that because mine was a very genuine, innovative beginning, and it was original. And it's harder to go from zero to the original place than it is to go from the original place to spending $350 million on spectacles.
Right.
So,
because I was thinking, like with people with their kids, eventually, the kids leave the nest, they go off and live their own lives, and it's hard for parents. And I was thinking, like, even for filmmakers, in terms of if they make something, they make a film, and then it spins off and becomes a franchise, and then it's like, it's still your kid, but it's kind of doing its own thing now. And I wondered how bittersweet that was in terms of just, when you see the movies, like the new movies now, it's like they're kind of like your first movie, but they're very different also than your first movie.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to see a complete regurgitation or replication of the first part of an idea. It has evolved, and it has taken that initial audience with it all the way through. It's not what I set out to do, and the joy of it is that it's what I did that got this whole thing moving and created this awareness of what a multiracial cast and a world of both, kitchen sink glamour, I'll call it, just the underclass doing something that the upper class or middle class finds fascinating. I mean, that's one of the things where anthropology has been a great help to me. And I tell people when I teach at film schools or I'm a lecturer there or something, and I say, the reason I propose anthropology versus film school is that, learning to understand a culture and to understand the subcultures. I said the subcultures are what moves the main culture. And when I do a film, if it's about Bruce Lee, I'm really dealing in the subculture of martial arts. And that's a tribe. That's a tribe with many different factions. But it's as much as studying, the Danai and New Guinea. It's something that to tell a story in that world, you need to analyze that culture. You need to look at it in, like Claude Levi-Strauss, binary opposition, the raw and the cooked. What is good? What is bad? What are the linguistic things of this subculture that are unique to this subculture? The word Nas had never been heard in the main culture. The whole idea of intercoolers and computer chips that are reprogrammed to make the cars do different things. That whole world was a world of language that we infused into the first one. And it took you on a secret, a kind of journey beyond the facade. And understanding that, like an anthropologist, is really, really helpful. And the same, many of my films deal with those subcultures, like martial arts or first responders or street racing. It just where you get or extreme sports. When I was working getting XXX developed, I went to the X Games a lot. I spent time with a whole bunch from Tony Hawk to Travis Pastrana, and Matt Hoffman, and wanted to know how they do it. What do they think? They're all have broken bones and all sorts of injuries. How do you deal with the fear? What do you do with the fear? And I'll never forget, Matt Hoffman says to me, sort of this BMX extreme biker, and he said to me, I've learned to put fear in a very small place. And I thought, okay, see, this is a subculture. These people have learned to think a different way. Because if I'm going to be towed into a vert ramp at 60 miles an hour, there's going to be a trail behind me of poo. Just scared. And these guys have learned that to rely on their skills, their training, and not to let fear. I don't know if you ever saw that video of Travis Pastrana waking up in a plane and jumping out without a parachute.
No.
Oh, this is one for ages. He wakes up. He doesn't even have a shirt on, as I remember. He's bare-chested. And he wakes up in this weird cot or pallet, and he yawns and he stretches and he walks over, and it's the door of an airplane, that's open. And he just jumps out. And then one of his friends wearing a parachute also jumps out. And these two guys go into free fall. And eventually, the guy with the parachute catches up to Pastrana and gives him a parachute. And Travis puts on the parachute in mid-free fall and straps it in, and at the last minute, pops the chute. So, the degree of guts to just I'm jumping out of an airplane, and I am totally dependent on my friend to come get me and hand me a parachute, or I'm dead.
Yeah.
Right? When you're dealing with these kinds of things, this is a lot of stuff that I then was able to make Vin understand, so that he could take on that kind of titanium balls, and to understand the psychology of, it's not just posing, it's that these guys have learned to put fear in a very small place. And so as an anthropologist, I kind of went out there and interviewed the tribe and came back with value systems, and cultural affects that only are unique to that tribe of extreme sports athletes. And then the subject, and you put that in the film, and that's what gives the film some of its authenticity. When I showed the film to the street racing community in Fast, they were really, really, really happy that somebody had gotten it right. Same when I showed it to the Bruce Lee disciples. They were very happy because I'd done the work, and the work came from being trained to think about subcultures the way an anthropologist does. So it's a thing I find if students would go into that, they'd probably come out with more real knowledge of humanity and how people work and how groups work, and then if you go into mythology, like I studied with Joseph Campbell at Sarah Lawrence, I audited his course, you get into the whole other level of the hero's journey, which is in effect what films are really mostly all about.
Out of curiosity, would you describe yourself as sort of an adrenaline junkie? Because I'm thinking about some of the movies that you've done and some of the research that you've done into these different subcultures. Are you drawn to sort of extreme, sort of adrenaline pumping kinds of worlds?
Yeah, I find they're kinetic, and kinetics to me is what makes movies, my kind of movies, worth making. It's very, there's not the kind of kinetic movement that you have when you're doing, either like a jet and stealth going Mach 3 and all of the different kinetic forces that play into some of the backgrounds of these stories, and I find it excites me and makes me alive, makes me feel very, very, very alive, and it's true when you're directing it, not just when you're viewing it, but when you're making this kind of movie and you're doing some major stunt, or you're bringing about a large mosaic of action, like the truck sequence that you saw, which is a 12-minute long non-stop sequence. And when you're out there running around with 18-wheelers and flying cameras under the trucks and around the trucks, actors are jumping truck to truck, and it's just there's a thrill of going to work every day, because it's not two people discussing where they're going to go to college. It's a joy to make it, and you want to insert in that joy of making it a thing that will emerge, that the audience will have that same joy in watching it. So
in between movies, when you're not making a movie, how do you fill that space or that void in terms of that excitement and because like you said, making a movie, it gives you that kind of rush, but in between, I know you surf, or you used to surf at least. Do you still?
Yeah, well, that gives me my adrenaline. Trust me on that. And I have a home in Bali, and the waves in Bali are real waves. They're real tough and real powerful, and they're in the coral reefs, and mistakes are painful. So I do that not because I want the adrenaline as much as I love the ocean, and I love the experience of gliding on a wave, and that's like no other experience I've ever had. I mean, it's right up there with sex, and it's a way of keeping very alive and in tune. Because when you're in the water, you've got to be aware of your other surfers, and you've got to be aware of everything in that environment affects whether you're going to catch a wave, whether you're going to ride the wave, and whether you can even survive unhurt. So you're watching all the time, you're alert all the time, your senses are on high alert, and that has a refreshing way of making each day sort of special, the way every day on a movie set is special. There are no 2 days that are alike. You never go to work and go, oh yeah, this is like this. Yeah, I'm just going to do what I did over here. And, you go every day and you're going, how the fuck am I going to make this happen? And how am I going to make it happen in 12 hours?
Earlier in the conversation, you were saying about a tough father is like rocket fuel. You have kids. How are you as a father? Did you sort of adopt a bit of that philosophy in terms of being a father yourself?
I can't. I'm like a gush ball. I mean, I love all of my 4 children. I have one older child and 10-year-old triplets, and I just love them so much. It's very hard for me to discipline them. Luckily, my ex-wife is a Mussolini, so they can get the discipline from her. I just want to shower them with the love that I felt like I didn't get enough of as when I was a kid. And that may not be the wisest thing to love too much, but on the other hand, I'd rather they understand that they're completely loved without any modifications or qualifications. It's just a blanket love, and guide them through intellect, through their intelligence. Like, this is not right. This does not work. This is not a scenario for success. You do something like this, you're going to get a bad reaction 9 out of 10 times. So save yourself the grief and just don't do it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you did this, go to your room.
Yeah.
So.
Which I think is so interesting to hear, because you talked before about when you were a kid and watching action movies and you just love the tough guys and Steve McQueen and like that. I think there's sometimes a stereotype that audiences have that guys like you that make tough guy action movies, that you yourselves are tough guys yourselves. Would you describe yourself that way? I mean, just the way that lovely thing that you said about your kids and how you feel about them would seem to kind of go against the grain of that. I mean, do you consider yourself sort of a macho tough guy?
I consider myself a complete laser-focused man. If I want to make a film, you better get out of the way, because I'm coming. Now, if that's macho, then in this one context, I'm very macho, and I can be very tough. As William Wyler once said, that the hardest thing about directing is resisting the temptation to be a nice guy. And, every minute of the day, somebody wants you to do something that would make their lives easier. Oh, Rob, do we really have to have 2 costume changes? It's going to take so much of the day, and we got to get her showered and redone and her makeup redone. And can't you just do it with the one? And, they have reasons from their point of view, but you're looking at your movie in your head, you're going, no, it needs those 2.
Yeah.
We'll just have to make it work. So, and standing up to studios, which they hate, and just standing up to anyone that would take the film in what you consider is a unhealthy direction for the movie. It's not the ego. It's not because I thought it up. It's that after analyzing what they've said, I really think it's not good for the film. And sometimes they'll say things and you go, yeah, that's a very good idea. That would be a more efficient way to do it. And the key thing to me is, I can tell you this story if you want to hear a story.
Of course.
What was probably one of the greatest lessons I ever learned in life, let alone on a set. But I was directing my first episode of Miami Vice, and I had never seen schedules like this. It was sort of like, well, we'll open in the counterfeiter's place, Crock and Tubbs, the counterfeiter's 2-page dialogue scene. Then the Miami Vice pulls up and does a raid, and, the guy turns on these water sprinklers, but the sprinklers are full of gasoline, and he lights the place on fire, and then they realize they don't have the counterfeiting plate, so the whole bust is going to go south, and Flight Deck jumps through a plate glass window and gets in there and salvages the counterfeit plates and comes out, and then there's a talk scene outside with Miami Vice, and then we break for lunch. I went, what do you mean break for lunch? That has to be like a day's work. No, then we move to this beach house, and you have this 2-page dialogue scene that you have to do with Crockett and Tubbs. And, and I'm going, where is the beach house? Oh, it's an hour and a half from the location. So I said, we got to shoot all this, have lunch, move an hour and a half, and then shoot another 2-page scene. And the production manager said, welcome to Miami Vice. And by the way, the only way you wouldn't come back here is if you don't make the schedule. So if you have any desire to direct more Miami Vices, you better make the schedule. So day comes, I'm sweating bullets. Now we're here. Do this. Drac over here. Crockett, come here. Bring the gun. Break the camera. All this stuff. And no matter how fast I'm moving, I'm falling further and further behind. And finally, finally we don't make the move. We have to eat there and go back to the scene after lunch, and then make the move after finishing all that. And now I'm moving into a house, and it's 5 o'clock, and it was winter, so at 6 o'clock the sun's going down, and I have an hour, and I'm watching the grips unload, lights and stands, and moving into the house, and I could see I'm fucked. How am I going to move into a house and light a house and shoot a 2-page scene with the two principals in an hour? And it's not happening. And so, kind of a wreck, I go to the craft service table, and I say to the craft service guy, "Could I have a Cafe Cubano? And please." And the guy looks up at me and he says, "You don't need no Cafe Cubano. You need to calm the fuck down." And I said, "What?" Talking to the craft service guy. He goes, "Yeah, you're in a world of hurt right now, but I know how you can get out of it." And I said, "All right, I'm all ears." He goes, "Don't go in that house. You go in that house, you're dead. And you'll wind up on your first day making a 15-hour day, and they won't forget it." And I said, "Well, what do I do?" He goes, "Look, they got 150 foot of dolly track on that truck. You go down to the beach, you lay the 150 feet of track. You put Crockett and Tubbs, Crockett on the left, Tubbs on the right. You walk up the track, and then Crockett switches with Tubbs, and that's where you get your coverage. You walk down the track, you put on a full magazine. They can't cut the camera as long as you have film in it. They will not stop a roll. So you go up the track, down the track, up the track, down the track, as many times as you can before you lose the light. So get going." So I go, "All right, not now, lay the track over here." We put on a full mag, 1,000-foot load in the days we used film, and it gave me 10 minutes of up the track and down the track, and up the track and down the track, with Crockett and Tubbs walking along, looking cool, and talking whatever bullshit we had them say. And then, I heard the film ran out, and the light was out, gone. It was dark, and I called Rap, and I had made the day. So I go back up to that craft service guy, and I go, "Look, man, I don't know what I can get for you. Are you a cigar smoker or a bourbon drinker? Whatever you are, I want to give you a fucking gift. You just saved my bacon." And he goes, "Yeah, okay, yeah." And I go, "But I gotta ask you a question, man. I mean, I don't mean any offense, but you're a craft service guy, and how do you know all this stuff?" And he goes, "Well, a long time ago, I was an episodic director, but I could never make the schedule. So I had to become a craft service man to stay close, and I've learned a few things."
Wow.
And I went, "You know what? The name of the game is not talking, it's listening."
Yeah.
The director who listens is a much smarter director than the director who just feels he has to talk all the time. Because after a while, your department heads and everything go, "Look, this guy just likes to hear his own voice. I'm not going to interrupt his flow. I'm not going to tell him what I think, And so you go and you listen to the people you've chosen to be around you all day, because they have real points of view, very educated points of view, because most of these people are on the set every day of somebody's movie. They work all the time.
Yeah.
Your guy works every couple of years. So,
what a great lesson to learn relatively early in a directing career,
Yes, listen. Don't talk, listen.
One of the things, while you were saying that, I was thinking, we all, guys, we grow up, we watch action movies, and even now, action movies are mostly made for, young people, right? 18 or whatever. But we all eventually get older, and we still like action movies. Does it,
Yeah.
in terms of, you're turning 69 in a few weeks, and it's like, does it feel odd that you're still doing action movies? Does it feel like odd, that you're making movies for people much younger than yourself now?
Yeah, but that's ignoring the fact that in my inner self, I'm still 25.
Uh-huh.
In other words, you don't take up surfing when you're 54. You don't live the life I've lived and consider yourself as a person of any age. I'm still joyous. I'm still curious. I'm still listening to new music. I'm still exploring and reading and thinking and exposing myself to everything new. And that is when, you're only as old as you have cut down or shut down your processes of being open. And I'm a very open guy to this day, and so when I get behind the camera, I want to tell a story. I'm telling it for the 25-year-old inside me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not calculating. I'm not going, what would the young audience like? Let me see. I saw Apple commercial, and they like pants that don't meet their shoes.
Right.
I don't think that way. I absorb and read and load in everything I can load in, and then when it comes time, I'll select an action film that is got something about it that I have never done before. I never made a hurricane. I never did like that inversion scene where they go through the roof of the mall, and and even though I had done big truck sequences like at the end of Fast, what I had in mind here was so much bigger and longer and more complex that I just was tickled when I was writing the sequences. I was like, yeah, this will be cool. I'll do this. But I never think, what will some 18-year-old say? Because I wouldn't even know how to think that way. I just go and I just do the stuff that I find exciting, and kind of keep a nice eye on, will it be clear? Will the narrative force of it work? And will the gonzo out of the box stuff really look authentic and feel authentic, and not whether, this is what a 20-year-old will like, but this is what I like, and if I can put it under my test, then I feel it's fit to pass on to others, because I don't want to give you anything that I'm not proud of myself. So it's really a matter of just melding with your story and all the input and all the things you've learned as either wisdom ends of living or just the new things you like. You like a group, a certain band, and the way they're produced and certain things that they're singing about. You put that in your head. You don't even know where it's going to come out, and then all of a sudden you realize you're actually cutting the scene to a rhythm that's very much like that song you loved, and then you slap the song on it, and you go, oh, wow, that works really well.
Yeah.
It's more intuitive than calculated, and it's more instinctive than intellectual.
One of the things also, because you've been in the business for so long and you've seen changes and evolutions, there's been so much conversation since Weinstein and those revelations came out.
Yeah.
Before that, there was conversations about, there's so few female filmmakers, there's so few people of color making movies, and especially in action movies, there's been so much conversation. Like when Patty Jenkins got to do Wonder Woman, it was such a big deal. I'm curious because you make kind of macho, tough guy action movies in certain ways. I think sometimes there's a stereotype of thought, like, these movies are meant for guys and they should be made by guys. You've made a lot of these. How do you feel about that kind of viewpoint on action movies?
He's got one. Oh, take that. Yeah. What I feel is that I don't think it's a sexual role at all, or gender assignment role at all. I mean, Catherine Bigelow making Point Break, whatever Jim Cameron had to do with it at that time, she's the director of Record, and that was as good an action film as anybody's ever made,
right,
in my opinion. I loved it so much I stole the plot for Fast and Furious. So, to me, if a woman wants to be in that world, in other words, I don't think it would be a wise decision for any director to go, intellectually, I should do a comedy, because there are very few comedy directors, and I'll become more sought after if I can direct comedy. That's a very bad decision, because you're either a funny person and have a sense of that comedy, or you're not. And if you're not, and you try to do a comedy, I can tell you from my own experience, it's going to fall flat on its face, and there is nothing worse than an unfunny comedy. I mean, nothing. There's no place to hide. So, if a woman loves action films and loves hardware and loves, and it can be tough women as leads as well as tough male leads, if they are immersed in that world and they love it and they want to tell an action story, they should go out and just do it. Because it isn't the fact that I have a penis that tells me how to direct these films. It's the fact that I love the genre, and I'm excited to be working in the genre. And if a woman had that same thrill of that subject matter and same allure or attraction, what do you call the car? We're driving? I thought we were Ubering. Oh, I think maybe better an Uber. Oh, right. Okay, we'll move to the car. I'm just saying that, to me, I cheer my sister filmmakers on to do whatever they want, and some of them want to do Mudbound, and some of them want to do Selma, and some of them, like Catherine, whether it's Hurt Locker or, Detroit, or she's just as tough as any guy, and in terms of film sensibility, because I think she really loves that modality, and that's in her. Yeah. She's close to 6 feet tall. She's a very beautiful woman on top of everything else, and I think she has this kind of real stance that some people would call masculine, but I think it's because she loves this arena and is really good at creating it. So I think I would never put any limits on anybody to do anything. I wouldn't put Paul Thomas Anderson. He made a film this year that George Cukor could have directed,
right?
Who was a gay director in the 40s and on, and he made this very, very exquisitely photographed thing about clothes and this strange relationship. It's very different than anything. This is a guy that there will be blood. So I think the beauty of directing, and what I've tried to do in my own life, is to work different stories, whether it's Boy Next Door and I'm doing a kind of sexy erotic thriller with a star like Jennifer Lopez, and to change it up, but always to bring a true sense of self, and that gives you this variety, And even if it's within the same genre, even if it's within the action genre, there's a big difference between the world of Fast and Furious and the world of Hurricane Heist. And different techniques, different challenges, and that's what I live for. I live to go to work and not know what the fuck I'm going to do or how to do it. You know, and then the figuring it out, that's the real creative part is, all right, we're going to have to put the hurricane in front of the lens because that's what I want. I don't want it to be excessively digital. I want the actors to look like they're really suffering, and not fake suffering, but real suffering. So how do we do it? You get with the right people and you begin to plan how much wind can an actor take in the face, what are we doing for debris, what are we doing, how are we creating the viscous rain that looks like smoke in hurricanes, and how are we going to light it, what are we going to do if the sun comes out. Oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry, we're moving on. We have an hour drive to the next meeting.
Well, I've taken a lot of your time. I really appreciate it.
No, I want you to have everything.
No, this is.
We don't need the charge cord. I think it's all right.
The last thing I wanted to ask about. The last thing I wanted to ask about though is that you had said at the beginning that you always knew you were going to be a director, even when you were producing. You knew.
Yeah.
You've been directing now for decades. Does it still, do you, I guess I'll put it this way. You had mentioned people like Christopher Nolan, saying like the luminaries like that. How would you evaluate your career and what you've done? How do you think of yourself as a filmmaker, or describing yourself as a filmmaker?
I think I've added a new dimension to what's possible in film. And I think that I'm going to be one of those guys that will be better appreciated later than in my own time. I think because of the nature of the films I've made and the tendency of the serious journalists and serious critics to throw them aside and actually deride them, there's an audience that I've built and over the years that has a real deep affection for these movies, and eventually that is what will last. As I once said to Vincent Canby, after you're dead, no one's going to remember what the hell you wrote. But after I'm dead, these films are still going to be shown somewhere. So, and they're going to have meaning to people. So it's just that thing where you go, all right, I've been privileged to make, 37 movies now as a producer or director. And I've lost count, but it's somewhere in the 30s. I've been able to work now constantly for almost 5 decades, and I have no intention of stopping. And so to me, the gifts I've been given are longevity, creative longevity, and a thrill of breaking into new territory, whether it be, an acting CGI character in Dragonheart or what many of the other things of cars and racers and how they feel, and flying cameras through engines and doing things that nobody had ever done. And it's just to keep creatively alive, and then someday somebody will either sum it up and people go, oh yeah, or somebody won't, in which case you become a footnote. But I'm the one who had the life.
Yeah.
The critic did not have the life. He did not go everywhere. He did not meet everyone. He did not have these resources at his fingertips to make magic happen or not happen. But I did. So there's a existential part of it, which is I loved the life I was living. I had that life. chapter. The fact is that I've lived my chapter and lived it on my own terms.
Rob, thank you very much. This has been great. And for the